In the preceding video, we learned how to use the center and radius of a circle in order to write the equation. If you haven't viewed that video yet, you're going to want to go backwards and watch that before watching this. Remember, in order to graph a circle, we need to know the coordinates of its center and the length of its radius. The equation of a circle with center at point HK and radius r is given by x minus the x value of the center squared plus y minus the y coordinate at the center squared equals the length of the radius squared. But if the equation is not written in that form, we need to first manipulate it in order to be able to find the length of the radius and the coordinates of the center. And that's what this video is about. For instance, in example 1, we're given an equation of a circle x squared plus y squared minus 10x minus 2y plus 10 is equal to 0. And our goal is to manipulate it into this form so that we can determine the length of the radius and the coordinates of the center. This looks a little bit scary and a little bit intimidating when you first get started, but once you get into it, it really isn't all that difficult. I'm going to go ahead and begin by grouping all of my terms that have x's together, all of my terms that have y's together, and everybody that doesn't have an x or a y, I'm going to move to the other side of the equation by adding it or subtracting it. So I'm going to group this x squared and the subtract 10x together. I'm going to group the y squared and the minus 2y together. And I'm going to go ahead and subtract 10 from both sides of this equation and move that to the other side. Now you used completing the squared last year with parabolas in order to find the vertex of a parabola, and this is going to be very similar. I'm going to start by looking at all of my terms that have an x attached to them, and I'm going to do what's called complete the square. I'm going to take the x squared, subtract 10x, and I'm going to add some value to those x's, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the y's. I'm going to take the y squared minus the 2y and add a certain value, recalling that whenever I add terms to the left side of my equation, in order to maintain the balance, I need to add the same terms to the right side of my equation. I'm going to determine the values that go in the green blank and the purple blank by completing the square. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come look at this coefficient in front of x. I really don't care whether it's positive or negative, because when I square it, either a positive or a negative will be a positive number that's being added to both sides. So the way I determine the number that goes in the blank is I look at that number in front of the x, I take half of it, square it, add it to both sides. So half of 10 is 5. When I square the 5, I get 25. I'm going to add that to both sides. Once I do that for the x's, I'm going to do it for the y's as well. So half of 2 is 1. When I square it, I get 1, and I'm going to add it to both sides. My next step is going to be to go ahead and to factor the first three terms. So in order to do this, you're going to have to recall your knowledge of factoring from your algebra class last year. We're looking for factors of 25 that together add up to be negative 10. Hopefully what's going through your mind is minus 5 times minus 5. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to factor the three terms with the y's. And again, I'm looking for factors of positive 1 that add up to negative 2. So y minus 1 times y minus 1. And when I combine the terms on the right side of my equation, I end up with 16. The x minus 5 times x minus 5, I'm going to rewrite and make that x minus 5 quantity squared. The y minus 1 times y minus 1, I'm going to rewrite to make y minus 1 squared, equals, and I can either write this as 4 squared or I could keep it as 16. But at this point now, we've transformed this into a form where we can easily determine the center and the radius of our circle. The center of our circle is going to have coordinates 5, 1, and again I simply read this from the numbers that are in the parentheses with my x value and my y value, the radius of my circle is going to have length 4. Alright, like anything else in math, when you first start, it looks a little bit intimidating, it looks a little bit scary, but the more you practice it, the easier it becomes. So let's go ahead and let's practice on the next example. Again, our goal, our mission is to determine the center and the radius. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start by grouping all the terms that have an x in them together. So x squared minus 4x. And this time I kind of know what's coming. I remember that I'm going to have to add a number in there to complete the square. I'm going to group the terms with a y squared plus 6y. And again, remembering that I'm going to have to leave some space to complete the square. And then everybody else I'm going to add or subtract away. So I'm going to subtract away a 4 from both sides. And I end up with an equals 4 on the left side of my equation. My next step is going to be to go and complete the square. So half of 4 is 2. When I square it, I get 4. And that's the number that I'm going to add in the blue blank on both sides. Half of 6 is 3. I'm going to square it to get 9. And I'm going to add that number to both sides of my equation. The next step in the process is to go ahead and factor. So I'm looking for factors of positive 4 that add to be negative 4. So that would be minus 2 and minus 2. When I go to factor the terms that go along with the y's, I'm looking for factors of positive 9 that add to be positive 6. So y plus 3 times y plus 3. And again, cleaning up the terms on the right side leaves me with a 9. So the x minus 2 times x minus 2, I'm going to rewrite as x minus 2 quantity squared. And likewise, I'm going to do the same thing with the y plus 3. And the 9 I'm going to rewrite as 3 squared, so that I can easily determine the center and radius. So the center of this circle has coordinates 2, negative 3, whereas the length of the radius must be 3. And again, I'm simply reading those values out of that circle formula that's in center radius form. The last equation, an example of exactly the same. So I'm going to go ahead now, group all my x values together, keeping in mind that I'm going to have to leave room to go ahead and to complete the square. Group my y values together, remembering that I'm going to want to leave room to complete the square. And that constant, the 10, I'm going to add or subtract, so I'm going to subtract that away from both sides. And I've got whatever I complete the square with the x's, whatever I complete the square with the y's. By now we're starting to get a little good at this, so it goes a little bit quicker. Half of the 10 squared is 25. I'm going to add that to both sides. Half of the 2 squared is 1. I'm going to add that to both sides. And now I'm going to factor and simplify. So this will factor into x minus 5 times x minus 5. The y part of this will factor into y minus 1 times y minus 1. And the right side of this cleans up to be 16. So I've got x minus 5 quantity squared plus y minus 1 quantity squared equals 4 squared, leaving me with a center of 5, 1. And a radius that's equal to 4. As always, I want to thank you for the gift of your time in watching the video. But I am going to ask for a few minutes more so that you can think about what the key ideas and important takeaways are from this video, and see if you can apply what you've learned to solve those questions on the next page. I don't care if you get them wrong. What's important to me is that you take the time to try. And if you try them and get them wrong, that's fine because we'll fix them when you come back to class.